Madam President, let me explain what the senator from Maryland is asking be done. And I explained earlier that there's a set of amendments that is in this unanimous consent request that are put into a manager's package where they've been agreed by both the Republican and Democrat leaders of the Senate. In other words, there's been agreement that these amendments are satisfactory and will be adopted upon the adoption of that amendment. The senator from Maryland's amendment that he seeks is not in that list because it's in the other list I described, the list that requires a vote of the Senate to determine whether or not that amendment should be adopted, in this case by 51 votes of the Senate. So Senator Van Hollen's, the senator from Maryland's request is, can I move my amendment? Can we modify the unanimous consent request to move my amendment to the place that it's assured of being passed, rather than leave it in the place in which he offers that amendment during the debate of the bills, the underlying bills that we're talking about this evening, in this case, Commerce, Justice, Science, and allow the members of the United States Senate to agree or disagree by approving his amendment with 51 votes or not. So, Madam President, the change in procedure is, do I get my amendment approved by unanimous agreement, or do I have to earn the votes of 51 senators to have my amendment approved? And the reality is, there is not unanimous agreement that the amendment that the senator is speaking, the senator from Maryland is speaking about, there is absolutely not unanimous agreement across this Senate floor, perhaps not even in a bipartisan, not in a partisan way. There may not be agreement from the Democrat members of the Senate, and there may not be agreement from the Republican members of the Senate, and therefore it's impossible for us to agree to allow an amendment that we know has controversy and is not acceptable to 100 senators to get this special privilege of being adopted so easily. The underlying unanimous consent request allows for the amendment that the senator from Maryland is proposing. He has the right to offer the amendment on the floor. That has been agreed to, but that is insufficient for the senator, and he wants to modify his amendment to be more easily, in fact, automatically accepted. This issue, sadly, if the senator from Maryland ultimately objects to the underlying request, if he is not able to have his consent agreement modified to get the amendment in the position he wants, he then has to decide, if he fails in that regard, he has to decide, do I want to object to all the bills, all 4 of them from being considered? And unfortunately, that includes Commerce, Justice, Science, which I and the senator from Maryland have worked on together as the chairman of that committee and as the ranking member or vice chair of that committee. And should he ultimately object to the entire package here because he isn't successful on this request to move his amendment, then all the work that he and I and the members of the subcommittee and the members of the full committee and other senators in their input have put together that passed in a bipartisan way out of the committee, that bill will fall by the wayside. We will then not consider Commerce, Justice, Science tonight, tomorrow, next week, and in my view, the United States Senate will never see Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriation Bill on the Senate floor. And therefore, our work to fund NASA, to fund the National Science Foundation, to fund our police in our home communities and our sheriffs in our home counties, to support the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and the U.S. Marshals, and to support the Department of Commerce in its efforts to grow the country's economy, provide broadband to our constituents at home, rural and urban, and to support the efforts of trying to find trade agreements by this administration and the efforts at USTR to find those satisfactory agreements that grow our nation's economy, the work that we've gone through to this point becomes irrelevant. If this was a momentary setback, I'd feel less concerned, less emotional, less connected to the desire of having this bill see consideration on the Senate floor in this package. Our appropriations process, which I have bragged about tonight, our appropriations process is fragile. We have been successful because we've each set aside things that we find objectionable and worked for the common good of the committee and the American people. It has been so long since the United States Senate has done its work in this arena and too many others. All of us, Madam President, all of us in this Senate, we have other things we'd like to do, but we devote our time and effort to public service, presumably to the public good of our constituents at home and the well-being of Americans across the country. And whether we do that well or not has a consequence around the globe. The United States of America is a place that needs to demonstrate to others in our own country, but others around the world, that we still have the capabilities of governing. My view is that I've never served in the United States Senate when it was at its best. What I know about the Senate is what I read as a kid. What I know about the Senate as the way it should be is the way I learned about it in history. And I want to work here where we do our jobs. If we fail here, we don't just fail for the moment. Once again, the appropriations process is set aside. When we return in September, I hope we're able to do more appropriation bills, but I doubt that this is the first one to be considered, and I doubt that the senator from Maryland's amendment goes away, so the problems we have tonight aren't going to disappear. We won't see this, and then we'll immediately turn to the consideration of a continuing resolution that funds the federal government at the same rate, at the same place, the same amount of money as we did this last year. Incidentally, we did. It's not incidental. We had the same problem last year. We didn't get our appropriation bills. Not one of the 12 appropriation bills were considered on this Senate floor, and we did. I shouldn't say we had to do. We did a continuing resolution saying we can't decide this. We can't get our act together well enough as Republicans or Democrats or as however you want to categorize people. We can't work together well enough to pass 12 appropriation bills on the Senate floor if we were ever given the chance. This is an indictment of all of us, and I take it very personally as a member of the Appropriations Committee with responsibilities to do our work. And none of us, to go back to the point I attempted to make earlier and got sidetracked, none of us want to be here if we're not making a difference. We have families. We have home places that we love to be. And we devote our time and effort to something that is a worthy cause, but the worthiness of that cause, if it's just to be here because you have your name on a door, you have perhaps an important sounding title, senator, there is no joy. There's no joy for me, and I can't imagine there's joy for others if the answer, well, we just can't work together well enough to do what the American people insist on, demand, and certainly deserve. This place needs to prove its relevance. And once again, if we see failure tonight, that failure will continue, and we'll demonstrate it one more time. Well, they just couldn't do it. They didn't get it done. Well, they passed 3 out of 12 appropriation bills. And in September, as the government is approaching a shutdown, because we haven't funded these 12 bills, we haven't passed these 12 bills, we'll be once again on the Senate floor scrambling to figure out how we keep the government open, What message does that send to our constituents that we can't even figure out how to have a budget or a top-line number and appropriate money? Every county commission, every school board, every city council has a budget, and they figure out how to spend money in a year. Why are we less than that? Why is it so difficult for us? I want to work in a Senate that works together. I don't expect us to agree, but there's common good that can be found in so many instances. And we are so close. The Senator from Maryland's amendment is about where the FBI headquarters should be located and the process by which that decision should be determined. I appreciate the senator's interest, but this is not even in the jurisdiction of the subcommittee I chair. This is before us tonight because one of the senators from Maryland's successors put money into the Commerce, Justice, Science Bill for the purposes of building an FBI headquarters, perhaps in her home state of Maryland. We have dealt with this issue. Let me say it this way. This issue has appeared before us before. The jurisdiction is in a different subcommittee of appropriations. And the jurisdiction in the administration rests with the General Services Administration, the GSA, not funded by Commerce, Justice, Science, or any of the other bills we're considering. The senator did offer an amendment in committee, and it ultimately failed. And one of the things I know about the Senate is it takes a majority at a minimum to pass a piece of legislation, and the senator from Maryland does not have a majority, in my view, who will vote for his amendment. He can work to make that happen. The senator from Maryland can lobby and encourage and educate senators on the Senate floor and in their offices from now to the time that this bill passes. If he ultimately objects because he doesn't have a modification to where he fits in the adoption of what we're talking about, then none of the things in the bill become law, and he's lost his opportunity to make the case to 99 of his colleagues about whether he's right or not. The senator and I have worked to find a conclusion that would be satisfactory, and I've been unable to. We've been unable to. I don't know exactly what my reputation is in this place, but I do think that people think I work hard and work hard together. And that's been the case in this circumstance. But as I've assured the senator from Maryland, I know no path forward with his amendment that allows this bill to pass the United States Senate. So when he decides whether or not he's going to object to the underlying question, the question is to the senator from Maryland is, the things that we've worked on together, do they matter more than the amendment that you want in such a way that you're unwilling to offer the amendment on the Senate floor and let the Senate work its will? I think I'm about ready to conclude my remarks, but it reminds me that so many times by our colleagues who are not on the Appropriations Committee, I think we get criticized for being insular. That's not true. We take input from every senator. 99 of the senators in this body provided information to the Appropriations Committee to tell us how to do our work. But there's this sense that we do our own thing. I've always said the reason we have the Senate is to bring the bills to the floor so everybody, those who are not on the Appropriations Committee, have the chance to have their input. I can't turn what was a majority vote against the senator from Maryland's amendment into something that a majority of my colleagues would support, but we are willing. The majority leader has indicated to the senator from Maryland he can have a vote to see if he can do it. While I've tried and failed to find 51 votes for the senator's amendment, I'm quite certain he's more skilled than I am. I'm quite certain that he is passionate enough about this issue. Let him find the folks who would support his amendment, and he can do so. It's been given to him, that opportunity, and all he has to do is find 50 senators to join him to say it. I don't think it's easy, but I think that effort on his part is a better outcome. Whatever the outcome of that amendment is, it's a better outcome than this legislation, Commerce, Justice, Science, the Agriculture Department, the legislative branch, and Military and Veterans Affairs. It's more important for us to demonstrate that we actually can legislate and appropriate. And here we are, starting on our first effort in 2025, and we're already hung up on something that is not really our business. I started to say earlier, this issue has been around a long time. It's always been resolved by somebody way above me as a chairman. Sometimes it's gone higher than, certainly, I don't mean certainly, higher, there's not much higher than the chairman and the vice chairman of the committee. But even they have struggled in the past to find a resolution to this issue about where the FBI headquarters should be. And it's gone to the other leaders, the 2 House leaders and the 2 Senate leaders, to see if they can find a conclusion. I can't solve the problem even if I wanted to. Shouldn't say it that way. I can't solve the problem as I want to solve a problem for the senator from Maryland. Perhaps somebody else can in this process, but don't let the work product that the senator from Maryland and I, members of the committee, and this Senate have worked so hard to find common ground. And we were successful and get complimented for the work we did in accomplishing this goal. Mr. President, I will not modify my request.